Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's Signpost webinar. My name is Eddie Burgess. I work with the Agricultural Catchments Programme in Teagasc, and I'll be looking after the webinar this morning. And joining me and helping with questions later on is Tom O'Dwyer from the Signpost Programme. This morning's topic follows on nicely, I think, from last week's presentation from Dr. Frank Mitloner from UC Davis, where he focused on largely methane emissions and its effect on climate change. And today, I think we're getting closer to the ground. David Dolan is a dairy farmer from Mayo, from close to Ballinrobe. Our paths have crossed through the Agricultural Catchments Programme. David is going to give a talk on net zero carbon emissions from agriculture, and he's an interest in this. I assume for quite some time. You'll give us those details, David, as we go on. But to develop those interests, he has been working with the fellowship. David. Nuffield. Sorry, I beg your pardon. I'm having a blank there. Excuse me, everybody. Nuffield Scholarship. You're not the first Nuffield Scholar to talk on the Signpost webinar, David, or the first farmer, but I'm assuming there are people who would like to hear some details on what the scholarship is about, and I know your talk will go into that. But how is everything in Mayo this morning? I'm assuming you're there. You're in Ballinrobe or close to Ballinrobe this morning, David.
Yeah. So we're about 10 minutes from Ballinrobe. 10 minutes from Ballinrobe and Claremorris. Good this morning. The sun is shining for a change. I suppose it's been a difficult enough run of it since last July. But in fairness, for a change, I don't think we're getting the worst of it in the west of Ireland, even though it has been hairy enough at times. So no, all good here. All good here.
All good. Ground conditions are good. Is silage in swing?
Yeah, it's so. They were good, and we got two showers last Sunday evening and last Tuesday evening. We got 50 mil of rain, and things were wet again between the two showers. But improving again. I think the forecast going forward is improving. So we'll look on the bright side. It can't get much worse.
Yeah. Please God, things will improve. Okay, David. Look, I think you know that we'll have, roughly speaking, around half an hour of a presentation from you on your experiences with the Nuffield Scholarship and your understandings for achieving net zero carbon emissions, and then we'll have a 20-25 minutes for questions after that. So I'll hand over to you now, David. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, and thanks for having me on the webinar. I suppose I have to say the webinar it's a brilliant resource for anyone I suppose interested in anything to do with sustainability in Irish agriculture. I used it on a number of occasions throughout my research for my topic. At this stage, is there over 200 webinars done? There's something, any bit of information that's needed. There's something that's somewhere in one of those webinars. So it's a great resource. So as I said, my topic was net zero emissions farming, the challenges and opportunities for farmers and co-ops. So I suppose just to start off, I said I'd do a little introduction to myself. I'm a dairy farmer in the west of Ireland. I'm near the Mayo-Galway border, about 10 minutes from Claremorris, 10 minutes from Ballinrobe. We're milking 120 crossbred cows on a 45-hectare milking platform. My parents are still involved in the business. And I suppose I was a late comer to dairying when it came to filling up my CEO. Farming probably wasn't on my radar as a career path, so I decided I did a Bachelor of Science in Energy from the University of Limerick. As part of my time down there, I did a work experience in a pharmaceutical plant down in Cork. And it was probably while I was there I realised I probably wasn't for the office life. Probably more suited to working outdoors. So I decided on finishing that degree that I give the farm at home a year to kind of rule it in or rule it out. And I suppose while doing that degree, that's where my interest in, suppose, the sustainable development came from, and greenhouse gas emissions from the Irish economy. But so I came home to farm in 2014 because I already had a degree. I did the distance learning green search through the Agricultural College in Mount Bellew. Finished that towards the end of 2015. Worked at home in 16, and I suppose at that point I was aware that I had no real experience working anywhere outside of our own farm. So I hit for New Zealand in 2017. Got a calving and breeding season done over there. Got a bit of travel done as well, which everybody at that time was doing, and I'd missed out on, I suppose, from when going home to farm full time. So I was back home in 2018, and towards the end of that, again, I was still looking for more experience. A management role came up on a farm 10 minutes from our home place. So I did that through 2019 and 2020, and things changed then halfway through 2020 when we got the opportunity to buy a farm right beside us at home. So that allowed me to come back home into the farm business at home to develop that in 2021. And towards the end of 21, I was accepted to do a Nuffield Scholarship, which I completed through 2022 and 2023. So what is Nuffield? Nuffield it's an agricultural leadership organization. It works through it's experience-based learning. We have this 1,900 scholars across the world at this stage, across 13 different countries. It was started back in 1947 by Lord Nuffield, who would have developed the Morris Minor car and I think the Nuffield tractor as well. Um, so he was an industrialist and a philanthropist, and I suppose if you, he would have seen the value in travel and getting experiences and seeing best practices in different parts of the world, and he brought them back to his his business or his industry at the time. And I suppose if you go back to that time post World War II, food security was a big issue, and I suppose he saw his experience and his travel as a good way of he could apply that to agriculture. And so the Nuffield scholarships were set up in order to, I suppose, develop future leaders for the agricultural industry. So in 1947, four scholars travelled to research topics and bring it back to the UK to develop UK farming, and that has grown from there to there's now 40 or 80, 85 scholarships been handed out across the world, across that 13 countries. Um, and the format is still pretty much the same. Scholars research their topic, throughout the world, come home and hopefully bring best practice back to their home countries. So I do enough of the scholarship. For me, it was, I suppose, broadening my horizons. I was just aware, I suppose, coming home to farm full time, farming can be an isolated enough a career at times, and I suppose the fear was, like your worldview can shrink considerably if you're just working in your local area in your local village um, constantly. So I suppose the Nuffield Scholarship was that element of my life which is kind of connected to the bigger picture. And I suppose you go to Nuffield events every now and again, and your mind is definitely opened up to a certain extent. Personal development is a big feature of the program. Leadership skills and critical thinking are a big focus of the program. Public speaking is something I definitely struggle with, but I suppose the more you are exposed to anything like that, you become more and more comfortable with it. An understanding of global issues, which is, yeah, I suppose you can't help but get that from while doing enough with scholarship. I suppose like the price of milk or the price of inputs that we're being paid is often influenced by what's happening on a global scale more so than what's happening in Ireland. And then travel. Travel is a big way to develop personally, I suppose, been exposed to different cultures, to different people, to different, I suppose, mindsets and points of view. You can't help but kind of question your own preconceptions or your own views on the world, and those things can only be a good thing. The global network of like-minded people. I suppose Nuffield scholars, I'm constantly surprised by the openness and kind of the willingness to help of the Nuffield network. I suppose that they tend to be kind of high achievers, and I suppose by going through the program, people, they have the confidence to develop their own businesses at home, or run with an idea that they might have. And anytime, like, once you are part of the network, you can ring up someone from, Canada or New Zealand or Australia, looking for information on your topic, or looking for a place to stay while you're traveling. And I suppose if they can't help you, they will, or if they can't accommodate you, they will find a way to help. Which is it's a brilliant feature. And then, of course, the a scope to investigate a topic that's of interest to you. I suppose it's maybe a different approach to the academic, uh, say, line of research, but it is, it's still just as awarding, I suppose, when you hand in your report and you present at your local conference 2 years after getting your scholarship. So, just a quick run through the program. Say successful applicants will be announced at their, was it the Irish Nuffields conference? It usually happens in November. The following March, they take part in the Contemporary Scholars Conference, which is, it's a conference where all the new scholars across the world come together in a different country every year. And they go through a week of fairly intensive, I suppose, leadership lectures, global food policy, networking, social events. It's a hectic enough week. Then you do your global focus program, which is a 6 week organized program, which can take between, between 4 and 6 countries, definitely 2 continents, and is um, an intensive block of travel, meetings, uh, social events, learning. You travel in a smaller group there, where it's usually about between 10 and 20 people, and you find out a lot about yourself on those trips, between exhaustion, sleep deprivation, constantly learning, and meeting people from different walks of life in different parts of the world. It's a brilliant, like, you couldn't, if you try to organize what you get to do on a GFP, you couldn't, because you couldn't in a million years, because you wouldn't have the connections, I suppose, to where you can get to within the Nuffield network. Um, then I suppose your personal travel is for another 4 to 6 weeks, where I suppose you utilize the global network that you develop in the first part of the program, and you, I suppose, fine tune your area of research, and I suppose you use your network to travel to different parts of the world that are relevant to your study topic. And then finally, you submit your report, and you present your findings at the Irish Nuffield Conference, usually 2 years after you start the program. So my travel would have taken me to the UK twice, to Italy twice. Initially, I was at the UN FAO Council on Food Security. That was very interesting. It was the first time I was there was shortly after Russia had invaded the Ukraine, and I suppose food security was back on the agenda at the time, and it was mind blowing, actually, to see how different countries and geopolitical maneuverings take place. Um, an interesting part of that, I suppose, aspect of that is farmers only started to attend the UN Council on Food Security in 2015. And since then, it was first started by Nuffield Scholar, and since then they've developed kind of their place at the Council on Food Security, and more and more farmers are attending every year. I also traveled to Costa Rica, New Zealand, Brazil, the USA, Northern Ireland, and Belgium. Um, I have too much to say about all of them on the webinar this morning, but I suppose all of them were unique in their own way. They had pros and cons, but unbelievable, and they were, I suppose, a brilliant learning experience. So that brings me back to my study topic: net zero emissions farming, the challenges and opportunities for farmers and co-op. And I suppose the title, as the title suggests, emissions from farms is a two-way street. We have a fairly good understanding of the methane, nitrous oxide, and carbon dioxide emissions. Um, coming from our farms, even though I suppose some of the figures are up for debate at times, but I think we've less of an understanding of the carbon sequestration that's happening on farms and the level to which there are carbon sinks that exist on our farms. Um, I suppose throughout my travel and my research topic, there are a huge number of businesses, farms, organizations that are claiming to be net zero, but when you dig a little deeper, you find usually they're on a path to net zero, or they've reduced their emissions by as much as possible, and with the residual emissions they have. They're either producing renewable energies from their business and using that to offset their residuals, or they're purchasing carbon credits to again offset their residual emissions. Um, this isn't possible in an Irish context, as carbon credits don't have a universal standard of methodology and verification, so they can't be applied to the Irish inventories. And renewable energy that would be produced on farm gets accounted for in the energy sector and not the agriculture sector, and so um, cannot be used in that way in an Irish context. So I suppose that's why, for my presentation, I decided to focus on how net zero could be achieved within an Irish context, within the framework of the Irish National Inventory Report, or national inventories. So the EPA are responsible for reporting Irish greenhouse gas emissions to the IPCC, and they do so through the National Inventory Report. So this table was taken from the report, and it just shows the key sources and sinks of greenhouse gas emissions in the Irish economy. So we have energy, industry, agriculture, land use, waste, and other. And this table works very well for emissions reporting point of view, in that every source of emissions in the Irish economy gets plugged into its relevant category or subcategory, and the totals added up. Where it does fall down is when a more nuanced or innovative approach is taken to greenhouse gas emissions or greenhouse gas emissions reduction in the Irish economy. So a farm business, for example, whose main activities would belong in the agricultural sector, could decide to plant a part of their farm in forestry or grow an energy crop for renewable energy production. Those two activities would get accounted for in the land use or the energy categories. Similarly, if a farmer decided to install an AD plant and take food waste from their local town, or produce biomethane from their own business, those activities would be accounted for in the waste and energy categories. And so this aspect of the inventories is acting as a barrier to innovative approaches to greenhouse gas emissions within the Irish economy. And the targets for 2050 are net zero for the economy and not the individual sectors. So I suppose if we are serious about reaching those targets, probably a more sophisticated, innovative approach or accounting system needs to be put in place in order to allow for innovative approaches to greenhouse gas emissions reductions. So what is possible at the moment, or what is possible, as it stands, Salahead Farm, which has featured on this webinar on a number of occasions and led by Professor James Humphreys, has reported a carbon footprint of 0.69 kg CO2 equivalent per kg of fat and protein corrected milk or milk produced in 2022 on their zero nitrogen trials. So they are just simply using, instead of using chemical nitrogen, they're using red and white clover to fix atmospheric nitrogen in order to grow grass to feed their cows. Farm Zero C is a collaboration between UCD and Carberry Co-op, and has a stated aim of reaching net zero by the year 2027. They're using a range of different activities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions on the farm, including incorporating mixed species to fix nitrogen and grow carbon stocks in their soils. They're using all renewable energies on their farm sheds, using slurry inoculants to reduce methane emissions from their slurry, along with a myriad of different activities. But they've reported a carbon footprint of 0.66 CO2 equivalent per kg of fat and protein corrected milk, for milk produced in 2022. But interestingly, they're still using 150 kgs of chemical nitrogen on their grass-only swards. And I suppose Gavin Hunt, the former project manager for Farm Zero C, has said so. Carbon sequestration is being measured on the farm, but it hasn't been applied to that figure. And they have modelled that good carbon sequestration could reduce that figure of 0.66 down to 0.41, which is it's a very low carbon footprint. But also, if we were to remove the 150 kgs of chemical nitrogen, which Solihull Farm has already proven, and then included a feed additive that has the ability to reduce methane emissions from cows' rumination, that figure of 0.66 could drop to below 0.3 of a kg of CO2 equivalent per kg of fat and protein corrected milk, which would be an incredibly low carbon footprint for milk produced on an Irish farm. But I suppose at this point, it's important to acknowledge that the cow is responsible for 67% of emissions on any Irish dairy farm. And I suppose removing the residual emissions from the system without removing cows from the system, and so reducing stocking rate and therefore reducing profitability is going to be incredibly, incredibly difficult. ARC Zero is an EIP based in Northern Ireland, led by Professor John Gilliland, which has a stated aim of accelerating farming in the north towards carbon neutrality. And I suppose the approach they've taken is they've accounted for all carbon, so carbon stocks on farm and carbon sequestration, which is happening on farm. They've taken soil cores down below 30 centimeters and to quantify carbon in the soils, and used LiDAR technology to quantify carbon being stored above ground in trees and hedgerows. And what they've done is compared how, say, gross sequestration affects gross emissions across a number of different enterprises based in the north. So, as we can see at the top of this table, the two dairy farms, when gross sequestration is applied to gross emissions, a reduction of 27% is seen. Is seen on their overall emissions. And I suppose dairy farming in the north will be a bit more intensive than it is here in the south. So the scope for that to increase will be that bit bigger. And then as we drop down the table and the enterprises become more and more extensive, we see that the effect that sequestration has on gross emissions increases. And even at the bottom of the table, some farms can be net positive. So I suppose what this table shows us is not every farm will ever get to net zero, but equally some farms can be net positive. And so the logical conclusion to this is that some form of carbon trading will be needed across farms in order to get all of agriculture to net zero. So where are the opportunities? At the moment, there is no standardized kind of frameworks or methodologies for carbon credits. But luckily, the EU are in the process of standardizing a framework for the voluntary certification of carbon removals, which will allow small and medium-sized businesses to participate in the carbon market. And I suppose a ton of carbon is estimated to be worth 100 euros by the year 2030 and 200 euros by the year 2045. And so this could represent a huge opportunity for small and medium-sized businesses, which would include farms. And if you consider that afforestation has the potential to sequester between 1 and 9 ton of carbon per hectare per year, carbon farming can do between 0.5 and 2 ton of carbon per hectare per year, and water table management could mitigate against the emissions of 20 ton of carbon per hectare per year. This could prove to be, I suppose, a lucrative or a diversification for Irish farmers if I suppose the appropriate frameworks are put in place and systems are put in place for farmers to take advantage of that. And I think that the EU I read somewhere lately that there is to be an announcement on the carbon credit standard in the next couple of weeks. So it's my opinion that the Irish co-ops are perfectly positioned within Irish agriculture to manage those credits. If you take a Revo co-op, for example, We have there's 1,000 milk suppliers for a Revo co-op, but there are 10,000 members, and they make up some beef, sheep, and some tillage farmers. I suppose the key opportunity there would be that those are the farmers that would benefit from from participating in the carbon market. But by the looks of things, dairy farmers will struggle to be net zero, or to reduce to a net zero, but more extensive systems or businesses could participate in that. And I suppose if the net figure for a co-op is brought down to net zero, and maybe meat processors could be brought into that too, um, then you have a genuinely net zero product being sold off the island. And so should demand a premium, and the new money being brought into the industry could improve the profitability of all enterprises. So my key conclusions, I suppose, from my study, the EU's targets for 2020 or 2050 are net zero and not gross zero. And more of an emphasis needs to be put on the carbon removals that are happening, but also innovative approaches to emissions reductions. There's an unnecessary, unacceptable level of assumptions in our national inventory report. So all data feeding into the report needs to be brought up to tier 2 or tier 3. So tier 2 would be country level data for emission sources, and tier 3 would be farm level data, so real detailed. But in the case of data feeding into um, sorry, in the case of data being tier 3 feeding into the national inventory reports, good practice will be awarded on farms, as opposed to all farmers been painted with the same brush. Not all farms can reach net zero, but similarly, some farms can be net positive, and that needs to be acknowledged. Carbon farming will require high levels of high quality data. This would require soil cores being taken down to 600 mil, where they're geotagged and measured at regular intervals between 3 and 5 years, in order to pick up and properly verify carbon that has been sequestered and locked away long term, in order to have high quality carbon credits produced by farms. But the EU standardising carbon credits will open doors for new money to be brought into Irish agriculture. So, the recommendations from my report were that, like, the whole industry needs to settle on a direction of travel. At the moment, from a farmer's perspective, there's an awful lot going on between the nitrous derogation, the nature restoration law, the talks of cow culls and renewable energy production, AD plants. Everything, it's like, yeah, I suppose things seem kind of up in the air at the moment. I suppose if we want to achieve the goals that we have set for ourselves going forward, we're going to need a long-term plan for Irish farmers across the board to aim for, and have the confidence to make the necessary investments to get us there. At the moment, it's very hard to change any part of our system, and things are changing, yearly, or certainly the framework, or I suppose the scope of where Irish farmers are operating in now compared to 5 years ago is very, very different. And I suppose that's shown in the mood of farmers at the moment. Increased investment is needed in the national inventory data, as I said before, to bring all data up to tier 3, and in order to uh, advantage farmers that are using best practice. A national carbon baselining program is needed. They've already started this in the north, but we need to know carbon stocks on our farms before we can start to build from here forward. We can't measure, or we can't manage, I suppose, what we don't measure. And the establishment of a carbon insetting bank would be needed in order to, I suppose, regulate the market and facilitate carbon trading between farmers and co-ops, and I suppose to ensure that carbon credits produced on Irish farms stay within Irish agriculture, before trading with the outside world. So to finish, I suppose I'd like to thank Nuffield Ireland for giving me the opportunity to do the scholarship to the scholarship investors, which we couldn't do it without them, and to my main sponsor, the Golden Jubilee Trust. And that's the end of my presentation. And thank you for having me.
David, thank you very much. You're very good in keeping to time and covered an awful lot there, both on the Nuffield Scholarship and the hurdles, I suppose, and how we need to work together to try and achieve zero carbon farming, not necessarily as an individual, but as an industry. And I think you covered a lot. I before we get into nuts and bolts, and I suppose maybe to help relax, I have to apologise for my brain freeze and forgetting of the Nuffield name for the scholarship, and it's particularly bad in my case because my in-laws are a machinery dealership, and my father some time ago set up a tractor dealership and sold Nuffield tractors, and going back a long time. So I'd say there will be plenty of slagging over the bank holiday weekend when I get home. So apologies to all the sponsors that you listed at the end there for that at the start.
Okay.
That's David. I suppose just to start off, you talked at the very end there that we need to set up a carbon insetting bank. What actually do you mean by an insetting bank?
So that would be a bank to keep carbon credits within Irish agriculture. That's so offsetting would be, a business buying carbon credits from a farm to offset their own emissions. But what we need to be doing is trading carbon credits between farms in order to bring all of Irish agriculture to net zero. Like I could have a net zero farm here, and my neighbour be a huge emitter. I don't get any credit for that, and he gets similarly no credit for his situation. So I suppose that's the idea of insetting and keeping the credits, I suppose, within Irish agriculture in order to bring the average down to net zero.
Yeah, no, grand. And also, sorry, another thing I forgot to say at the start, and people are asking, but just to encourage people to use the Q&A at the bottom of the screen to bring questions in. Tom, have you had an opportunity to read any questions there that?
I've been keeping an eye on them, Eddie, so there's a few in there. The question in from Michael regarding leadership, and maybe I'm going to maybe slightly rephrase it a little bit, and put it to David. You've completed your study now. You're shared it with this audience this morning, and you'll have an opportunity to share it at the Nuffield Ireland conference later this year. But I suppose what are your plans to, play a part in leading the Irish agricultural sector on this journey to net zero?
I suppose we still have to be profitable. I'm still a business. My parents are still involved. I'm still involved. I'm hoping to get married and build a house down the line. I still have to remain positive. So I suppose I'm doing as much as I can do within my farm business, but at the same time, I'm not going to drop to 1 cow per hectare of a stocking rate and use the carbon sequestration happening on a farm to offset the residuals, because I'd go out of business. So I suppose it's promoting that the level of doing as much as we can, and taking responsibility for the emissions that are happening on our farms. But equally, there has to be a balanced approach, and I think that's probably where a lot of the confusion or discourse, or some of the more militant people against agriculture seem to think that we can just stop doing what we're doing and everything will be fine. Like we need to do what we can do, but at the same time be realistic of what's possible.
Okay, so and picking up on that point, as I see it, there's two ways of it moving towards net zero or approaching net zero. One is to, as you've said yourself, do all you can do on your farm to reduce emissions while still farming in a way that generates an income. And secondly then is to try and store away or lock away carbon through in the soil or in trees or hedgerows and so on. You've mentioned both of those in approaches in your presentation. So my question for you then is what practices have you adopted on your farm to try and move towards net zero, David, so far?
Yeah. So I suppose when it comes to building carbon in our soils, it's funny enough, a grass-based grading system probably ticks a lot of the boxes as it is. The few things that we've been doing to further what we're doing on our farm, we're reducing the amount of chemical nitrogen we're using through the incorporation of clover. We have plans in place to start incorporating mixed species. We're going to invest in renewable energies down the line. We have a fairly, efficient cow type, and from that point of view, all efficiencies add up.
Mm.
What else are we doing? All of the usual things. We're using protected urea, low emission slurry spreading. Like we are a dairy farm at the end of the day, and as I said during in my presentation, the cow herself is responsible for 67% of the emissions.
Mm.
So, like, I'm probably never going to be net zero on my farm, but I suppose I'm removing all of the unnecessary emissions in order to, be responsible and do as much as we can for our emission reduction. Because I suppose you often hear farmers, hit back and say it's not us that's causing, climate change or whatever. And we're bearing the brunt of it at the moment, as we can see from the weather we're after going through for the last, 6 or 9 months. But we still, everyone has to reduce as much as they can. And I suppose if we're doing as much as we can, then we can I suppose we can talk, or we can complain. Or
I'm curious if it is your view, or what is your view? Is this journey to net zero and the potential for generating carbon credits on that journey, which will have some future value, is that something that any farmer can get involved in the future? Is it open to all farmers?
Oh, 100%, 100%. I think
Okay.
the best thing about that is the more extensive you are, the easier it is for you to participate in that and to generate credits. And at €200 a ton by the year 2024, if you're sequestering 4 ton per hectare, that's €600 per hectare on top of what you might already be achieving. That's turning into a fairly profitable enterprise. So I suppose the hope would be that the new money brought into agriculture by Europe standardizing a carbon credit, it will lift the lowest profitability systems up, up from where they are. I suppose like dairy farming, historically has been fairly profitable. But the hope is that it's the lower the lower profitability enterprises will be lifted by this, because they're the people that are struggling the most, and the hope would be that it's another diversification from their businesses, which wouldn't see them have to completely turn their businesses inside out in order to take advantage of that. And then, like, it is also it's open to dairy farmers as well. But as I said, cows produce a lot of methane, and you can, as your speaker said last week, we can argue till the cows come home about the different types of methane. But at the moment, they've been treated the same. Hopefully that changes down the line. But if we are seen to be finding solutions instead of constantly shouting that we're getting hard done by, people, you lose the room in that situation.
There's an interesting question here, and it links back to a slide you presented in relation to the national inventory approach to counting emissions, and whereby, and you gave the example, if a farmer decides to plant forestry and it then stores carbon, or the farmer decides to re-wet a peatland area, and it then reduces emissions from that area, it's counted elsewhere. It's counted under land use change, and forestry. And the question then, kind of related to that, is the concept of net zero that you've presented not doomed to failure, with the peatland re-wetting and tree planting being claimed by LULUCF instead of by the agricultural sector? So would you like to comment on that?
I suppose that's a nice easy one. But I suppose, like, the fact that we're in the separate, like, it's been divided up into the separate categories. At the end of the day, it's net zero for the economy, and as long as the emissions have been taken out of some sector,
Yeah.
that's a good thing. I suppose the problem with the situation at the moment is that the different sectors are fist waving across between, we're doing a better job than you're doing, or agriculture is bad and energy is doing a good job, or the other way around. Like, you're it's you're not seeing the wood from the trees there. You're just, yeah. So I think, like, all reductions will be good, and I think it's going to take some sensible, so common sense thinking, I suppose, to somehow upgrade that system, so that, if emissions are coming from one sector and being credited to another one, somehow both sector or both categories get credited, to some percentage.
Yeah. And I think also maybe there's a part of the answer there that involves the level at which the emissions are counted at. So in your slide, the national inventory approach, that's at a national level. So it's, as you said yourself, it's the entire economy. For an individual farmer like yourself, David, you can also do an inventory and count up what you're generating and what you're sequestering. And at an individual farm level, that's or an individual business level, that's where the credits are generated or not at the national inventory level, I guess.
Because there's no advantage to me being, I could be the best farmer in the world and my neighbor could be the worst, and we're both painted with the same brush. Now, I'm not saying that I am now or anything like that, but
okay.
In order to get people to chase the reductions that are needed, and the same applies to water quality. I'm sure Eddie could comment on that. Like, there needs to be some way of separating out the good from the bad.
I see a question here from my Teagasc colleague Peter. He asks, you've mentioned, David, that you've reduced nitrogen. And you also mentioned in your presentation the figures from the Teagasc Solihead farm on a zero nitrogen system. Are you given any consideration to phasing out fertilizer nitrogen totally once you achieve a certain level of clover across your farm?
Oh, of course, definitely. If we get that far, I suppose we started in our clover journey back in 21, 22, and I would safely say I thought I had it cracked then. We put in reseeds and there was loads of clover on the farm, and we reduced nitrogen on those paddocks to zero, and they grew away fine. The last 9 months has thrown all that up in the air. With repeated damage, clover getting, we just haven't had the soil temperatures for clover to prosper. So it's going to be a much harder journey than we probably first expected. Clover is kind of, it's a finicky enough plant, and it's a whole new skill set that we all have to learn. But definitely, like, sure, it's a no-brainer that if we could cut out that part of our emissions profile, it would be brilliant. But at the end of the day, I still have to feed my herd of cows, and if I cut nitrogen in order to, for the sake of clover, and I don't grow as much grass, I then have to supplement through, imported feed, or have less cows, and so less profitability. So, it's not just black and white. Cut nitrogen for the sake of being having low emissions. We have to kind of balance the system with that approach, and I suppose we'll get there. But like Solihead has a lot of work. Is it 20 years growing clover? I've been 3, so we've a long way to go, and I suppose a lot of people have a long way to go.
Yeah, and just maybe to pick up, and Eddie, I'll go back to you after this maybe, but I have one other question then to put to David. before we started your presentation, we were talking, and you talked about, as a farmer, that the change in the weather patterns and the more intense rainfall that we've seen in the last number of years, that it's actually making your job as a farmer even trickier than it was before, maybe 10 years ago. Would you just comment on that? That decisions around fertilizer spreading and slurry spreading are made more complicated by the weather we're experiencing.
Yeah, I suppose something and a lot of people or discussion groups are talking at the moment. Like we're all that bit more. We're conscious about the amount of fertilizer we're spreading or the slurry we're spreading and when we're spreading it. And even though we're all using protected urea and we're using low emission slurry spreading, like we're now trying to. Whereas years ago, if your tanks were full, you spread it and you didn't worry about it. You spread your nitrogen after every round, and it grew because we were spreading a lot more nitrogen at the time. And so even if we did get bad weather, it tended to be there when you needed it. Whereas now, like we're trying to time our fertilizer spreading to utilize it perfectly. That's adding a layer of complexity to it. Then we're the same with slurry. You're trying to time that perfectly to get the most out of it, because we now need to use, especially with the fertilizer register, we need to utilize every gallon of slurry on our farm. But again, that's adding another huge layer of complexity. And then, like with the weather we're getting at the moment, anyone that's spread slurry last week, which looked like perfect conditions, maybe we call it Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And then we get this absolute downpour on Sunday evening, which wasn't given in the forecast models. There was only a couple of mil promised, and we get like 15-20 mil of rain in 2 or 3 hours. And then the mental strain of that and the stress of that. It seems to me like the layers of complexity, even though they are for the right reasons, we're trying to reduce our effect on the environment. They're adding huge amounts of I suppose stress and complexity to our systems. So it is like it's something worth considering. I suppose anyone, someone that's might be sitting on this chair who isn't bothered about the environment and who just spreads the fertilizer, spreads loads of fertilizer and spreads the slurry. They're not stressing over it. It's an easier position to be in. But to be fair, the last 9 months have been exceptional, and you'd hope that even if our weather patterns are changing, that it's not going to be this all the time.
Okay, Eddie.
Yeah, no, I'll just follow on that with our experiences in the Catchments Programme. When you talk about the last 9 months since July, probably more than 9 months since July last year, but only last Wednesday in Castle Dockrell, we had a torrential downpour, and within 1 hour it rained 26 mil. In the total shower rained close to 30 mil within an hour and a half, and I think if not the highest, it was very close to the very highest rainfall we've measured in the 15 years. And within the 12-hour period following that rainfall, we measured close to, if not exceeding, what would normally leave the catchment within a year for phosphorus. Within 12 hours, we measured an annual phosphorus discharge in one catchment. And that's when we thought we had come out of the bad weather period. Like the crops had been sown and we were hoping to put the bad weather behind us. And only half an hour away in another catchment in Wexford, we had no rain. But these are the difficulties that are facing us. Anyway, to move back to the questions, sorry, I'm digressing there a little bit. Quite a few are coming in, David, on the advantage that the Nuffield Scholarship has given you in an awareness on these matters, and I suppose that has come from your interest. But and I suppose you are doing this today, but people are wondering who is talking to the farming community about the impact of not reaching a net zero carbon emissions at the end game. And I'd like to add, in addition to that, like you listed a number of countries that you visited, and I'm wondering, how do we compare talking to farmers about these issues with the other countries that you visited?
Yeah, so that was a bit of an eye opener for my travel. I suppose you have to contextualize this our situation. We're a developed country on the edge of Europe, um, who we didn't go through the industrial revolution. We don't have heavy industry here in Ireland. So agriculture is a very big portion of our emissions profile. New Zealand are very similar. So my experience of from my travels is there's a lot less of a focus on food emissions from food production in other parts of the world, mainly because food security for large parts of the world, food security is a lot bigger issue. It's a lot closer to home. Besides that, even if you take the UK or Australia, agriculture because they have heavy industry, agriculture is a much bigger portion, or so yeah, because they have heavy industry, agriculture is a much smaller portion of their emissions, and so there doesn't seem to be the same focus um, on agricultural emissions in those countries. I suppose the fact that agriculture has such a big portion of Ireland's emissions, it is really a good thing. And I suppose the better job we do as a country, probably that figure is going to grow. But um, my experience of yeah, sorry, my experience from my travel was that probably we have one of the higher focuses globally on emissions from agriculture, and so yeah, we probably have more work done. And then it depends on how countries reporting mechanisms or inventories are done. Like when we were in Brazil, most farms had solar farms attached to them, ones that we visited, or some form of an AD plant. Now, if there was methane leaking from those AD plants, I don't think there was anybody checking that either. But it was interesting. It was kind of challenging enough, I suppose, when you talk to people from other parts of the world, and definitely when you talk to people from parts of the world where food security is an issue. Like they're worried about production and feeding people, whereas now
Yeah,
we're not feeding we know we're not feeding the poorest people on the Horn of Africa with meat and milk, but at the same time we're very suited to milk and meat production, and so curtailing that for to hit our targets, it doesn't seem, depends on your point of reference, but it doesn't seem like the most sensible thing to be doing.
yeah, yeah. No, priorities can be very, very different when food security is an issue. And
Very
I,
different, yeah.
I suppose with that in mind, and given that we are a big exporter of food from this country, and both looking at what we're doing within Ireland and looking at the more global picture, what advice would you give to policymakers here based on your findings? Would you have it like there's elections coming up, future, there's plenty of politicians knocking on the door, or at every gathering you will meet them. Would you have a few pointers that you'd like to give to them now?
I suppose common sense would be the main one, but I suppose, yeah, like I suppose we need, first of all, I think we need a long-term plan. We need something to aim for long term. But like what we want Irish agriculture to look like in 20 years' time, in the year 2040 or 2050, and probably work backwards from there. Like it seems to me, even if talk around the derogation, like I suppose reducing our industry or hamstring an industry that is successful in Ireland for the sake of reaching emissions targets. Uh, it doesn't seem like a sensible approach to take, and it seems like it probably will be something that end up having to be rolled back on down the line as things change again. So um, I suppose, yeah, let's not shoot ourselves in the foot going forward in the short term in order to reach our 2030 goals, and then have to change again further down the line. Did that answer your question?
No, it does. It does very clearly, and common sense is a repeating theme that I'm hearing an awful lot. And I think people like honesty and common sense.
I think it's the long-term goal. Like, I think if we're it's a long-term goal. If we're trying to change things drastically in the next, 4 or 5 years, and then have to change them again after that, like, farmers won't buy into that, and it stops people investing going forward. Like, even in my own business, we're sitting waiting to see what happens with the derogation, to see if we'll build a shed and flurry stores to keep more cows or not. So, like, isn't that just a perfect example of when policy is kind of flip-flopping, and people can't make the decisions that need to be done because these things are expensive, you know.
But on the other hand, David, without appearing to be argumentative, couldn't you say that and you've presented it, that the long-term objective, the 2050 objective, is to get to net zero, and that we can take that at a national level. The country as a whole needs to get to net zero from an emissions point of view, or at an individual farm level, if every farmer attempts to get towards net zero, some will get there and maybe pass it out and be able to generate carbon credits. Others won't quite get there, and you've referred to that in your presentation. So if people were to take that away from the presentation as a kind of a long-term 2050 target, would you agree with that?
Yes, if the framework, if we saw those things being built or being put in place at the moment, if we could see that those things were being developed, and it's not something, I suppose, that I can say is jumping out at me at the moment.
Okay. Eddie, I just want to mention one thing before it's 10:30, and you're probably going to try and wrap up. But I just see in the comments in the chat, there's or the Q&A, I mean, there's just a comment from Catherine Lassaretz of Nuffield, Ireland, and I think our colleague Yvonne has put it up in the chat. But the Nuffield Scholarships 2025 are open for application right now. The application form is available on the Nuffield Ireland website, and the link has been put up in the chat. And I think I'd just like to say, I think David is an advertisement for I suppose, the opportunity that Nuffield Ireland presents, and it's great to have heard his story this morning.
Absolutely, Tom. I'll reiterate that exactly. One of the objectives I think I saw there, David, when you started, was that it was to help you with public speaking, and the hour has ended in a flash. And I'm guessing that maybe public speaking was something that you didn't have much difficulty with before the Nuffield Scholarship, but certainly you have excelled today, and well done. And thank you very much for being with us. Pleasure. And I look forward to meeting you in Ballinrobe. It won't be too long until I'm over that part of the country. So, look, we've gone slightly over time, so I want to wrap things up. I just want to thank Yvonne Maher and all those that work with her in putting all this together. These webinars don't just happen on their own. Tom, I think, just rocked up today at 9 o'clock, and it was all in place and ran like clockwork, as it does every week. So thanks very much, Yvonne. Next week, continuing on the gaseous emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, we have Drs. Hazel Costigan and Lawrence Chalou, who are talking about feed additives to reduce methane. So with that, I'll thank you all for coming along. It's been a pleasure. Thanks very much, David. Thanks, Tom. Take care.
You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review, and subscribe to the Signpost Series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson, and thanks for listening.